Great. Can everybody see the slide? Good. Well, greetings, everyone. Let me first say how exciting it is to be part of this new stage in the development of the SWA. This new organizing program is breathing new life into our work. So please know that we appreciate what you're doing very much. We begin this session with this very important question. What time is it? Not the time of day or week or month or year, but what time is it in terms of the political realities we face, the socioeconomic and political time we are living in? That's the question we are raising. Our day-to-day work starts out focusing on the immediate issues faced by workers on the job and in their community, fits into the big picture of regional, national, and global scale of things. And in this sense, we're fond of saying that activists must think global, and act local. Get that right. Think global and act local. Now, the image on this slide is the doomsday clock used by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists to indicate how close we are to nuclear disaster. This image can also be used to point to the general political situation, how close we are to devastating corruption of an already corrupt system, a right-wing transformation that will turn the clock back. Then we will really find out the meaning of the phrase, "Make America Great Again," back to the days of overt government-sanctioned racist oppression and unregulated rule by capital that beats down any effort to have working class control in society. SWA needs to answer this question. What time is it? What time is it right now? Of course, the fundamental reality we face is crisis. Almost in every phase of our lives, we face a crisis. It's useful to frequently review the major phases of these crises. We need to keep the issues in our conversations, both the general patterns as well as a scientific and specific manifestation of these crises we face in our workplace organizing. Our focus is where the rubber hits the road, where the workers experience the crisis, but our perspective has to keep the broader context in focus as well. The main aspect of the economic crisis is the intensification of the class polarity over the recent period. The leading millionaires became billionaires, while the masses of workers fell or remained stagnant. Few statistics. The top 1% in the United States held 25% of all wealth in the US in 1970. But by 2020, they held 35%. On the other hand, the bottom 50% of income in 1980 had 19%, but by today, that fell to 13%. In other words, the polarity increases. Now, part of this comes from taxes. The tax rate for the top 1% from 1944 to 1981 was 81%. But today, the capitalist Congress has dropped that to 37%. So from 81% to 37%. Again, the rich getting away scot-free. Finally, on this, since the pandemic, world income for 99% of the people in the world has dropped, while for US billionaires, their wealth jumped 70%, an increase of more than $2 trillion. Damn, if this ain't clearly a gangster criminal situation from our point of view, then what is it? The political crisis is staring us in the face. Every tool is being used to devalue any semblance of democracy. Now, I have more to say about this later. Not only Trump, but Biden continues the path to war, moving simultaneously to confront China in its backyard and bringing NATO to the border of Russia. This while the mishap of pulling out of Afghanistan, the longest foreign war for the United States, now we're facing the danger of new war on two fronts. This while some generals are worrying about the possibility of a right-wing section of the US military being tied to right-wing maneuvers following the likes of former General Flynn. Now, climate change obviously is right now, not sometime in the future. More to say about this. We see it in every aspect of the environment. There are predictions every year about how fast things are moving, and they are all generally proved to be wrong. Things are not getting better, things are worse, and it's happening faster than anybody thought. The Biden administration has approved more oil and gas drilling permits on public lands per month than the Trump administration did during the first 3 years. So we are relying more than ever on fossil fuels and feeding the petrochemical corporate giants. Racism continues to be the great American strategy for capitalist rule, while using sections of the Black middle class to cover for them. Remember, Sanders' campaign was defeated by the Black middle class leadership in South Carolina to put Biden in. Now racism is more and more becoming a public force in society. Not hiding, but public. Remember McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, recently compared African Americans to real Americans. It doesn't get any more clear than that. Now, finally, we come to the crisis of the state, where we can find the levers of power dealing with all of these other crises. The Republicans have a fascist caucus, the Freedom Caucus, pulling it to the right, while the Democrats have two Republicrats, Manchin and Sinema, bringing down their liberal reforms. The Supreme Court is now 6-3 right-wing majority with more to come. Okay, now you might want to take your pencil out for this one. We need to learn a new term from political science, anocracy, A-N-O-C-R-A-C-Y, anocracy, A-N-O-C-R-A-C-Y, which means a state in between authoritarianism and democracy. Sometimes we need a new word to clarify our thinking. Another one is kakistocracy. It's a strange word, but you know what that word means? It means a state or society governed by its least suitable or competent citizens. So we got a kakistocracy leading us into an anocracy. If this was just a word game, it would be funny, but it's the real. We're dealing with it, and it ain't funny at all. We got a kakistocracy leading us into an anocracy. Now, when visiting, wait a minute. Anyway, okay, I went too fast, but when visiting, yeah.
Sorry to interject. Your screen is kind of zoomed in, so it's a little hard for us to see the full slides. I don't know if you could zoom out just a tad.
Okay. Is that better?
It got a little bit better.
That's something that, can you mute it for a second? Yeah, Abdul, do again what you just did, because a bunch more of the screen is showing, but it's still not entirely showing.
Great, perfect.
Okay. So to continue, when visiting the British town of Smethwick in England, Malcolm X responded to the worsening situation by saying, "I wouldn't wait for the fascist element in Smethwick to erect gas ovens." This was a reference to Nazi Germany and its advice we need to take. Now let's make this as plain as it can be. We face a fascist danger. And no matter how terrible you think things are now, they can get much worse. Now, the word we use to describe our situation is important, but more important is the explanation of why we use whatever term we use. Two important points make the political action of these two men the same. One, they were and are supported by capital in opposition to the interests of the masses of working class and poor people. And two, they were both elected. Adolf Hitler had been appointed chancellor in 1933, then elected president of Germany in 1934. We can tie them together around the concept of the big lie. Hitler introduced this term in his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, published in 1925. Now, this is how his chief of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, put it. This is a quote. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent. For the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. End of quote. This is an exact description of Trump as president of the US before and after. He attacks the legitimacy of the state by saying the 2020 election was a fraud, even when there's no evidence and over 30 court cases proved otherwise. We, of course, seek to tell the truth, to embrace science as a popular tool for human understanding and a universal consensus, a common basis for public policy. We are the majority in this country and all over the world. So our very democratic demand is all power to the working class. Now, fascism takes different forms in each country, but it shares common characteristics. It is a system backed by the capitalists, hence it must be considered part of their playbook that comes out in times of crisis. It's authoritarianism, basically one-party rule or one leader rule. The democratic discourse is replaced by violence, including violence used to silence the media. Racism is used to divide the workers, demonize countries, and elevate what is claimed to be a superior race. This is especially true in the US now as European descendants are becoming the minority. Making America great again means keeping white people in charge. And of course, that does not mean the white working class. It attacks science. It's pro-war. Now, the two images at the bottom of the slide are historical. In 1925, 30,000 members of the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, marched in Washington, D.C. You can see the Capitol there. In 1939, the German supporters of Hitler packed Madison Square Garden for a pro-Nazi rally. And these tendencies continue today. Just like the German Nazi movement marched, so did their US imitators in the US in 2017 march in Charlottesville. That picture there. The Nazi sign in Germany read, "Jews not allowed." While in the US, some signs read "no dogs, Negroes, or Mexicans." And of course, they also meant no Jews, Catholics, and many others. But a united working class stands against all of this. First, again, we are the majority. This is about what is objectively true. It's not how we think and act. Working class power requires that we think and act like we're the majority of society, instead, indeed, of all the world. Another important point is that we have to constantly remind our fellow workers that this government, what this government is about and stands on, in quotes, the consent of the governed. Now, let me give you another quote. And this one is from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is a right of people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. End of quote. The key phrase is deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Right now, we are organized under the leadership of lawyers and professional politicians, not ourselves. In 1979, just 29 members of the House of Representatives listed their prior occupation as professional politicians. 1979, 29 members. By 2019, that number had increased to 171, a 490% increase in people who identify themselves as professional politicians. The Senate hasn't fared much better. In 1979, 15 senators identified themselves as professional politicians. Today, the number sits at 49, a 227% increase. And being a lawyer is the second most represented profession in Congress. 157 members of the House and 54 members of the Senate identify as attorneys. Now you have to ask yourself why people who are not like us always have the right to represent us and then really don't represent us. Why aren't trade unionists good representatives in politics like they should be in our workplaces? Working class power must mean leadership in all areas, economic, political, and social. But this is not an easy concern. It's a structural problem that can only be solved by building leadership, cadre, prepared to lead. Okay, so let's take one area that is currently hot as can be and staring us in the face, politics. The hardcore right wing, the people who believe in the big lie, are making moves to take control of the government at all levels, local, state, and national. This is the battleground that must be kept in mind and on which we must be prepared to fight. The Democrats have a thin majority in the House and the Senate and in the White House. Well, with the two Republicrats in the Senate, Manchin as a corporate capitalist himself in coal, and Sinema in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry, the Democrats hardly have a majority in the Senate. What is clear is that the northern industrial states are declining and the southern and western states are on the increase. In our conversations going into the 2022 midterm and 2024 presidential elections, we have to deepen the discourse and assist our fellow workers in becoming knowledgeable enough to participate in the battle of ideas that will be a dominant aspect of public discourse and the media. Now let's take a look at 4 aspects of this political crisis that we're in. The first issue is who votes. This chart is about voter turnout and what a clear pattern it is. There's a direct correlation of how much money one makes and whether one votes. What is it was exactly the opposite, which would produce different policy? I think so. Then we would have the responsibility to run things. But today, the right wing and state legislatures all across the country, especially in the South, are setting things up to make sure they control the outcome. More than 400 bills with provisions that restrict voting access have been introduced in 49 states in the 2021 legislative sessions. They are setting up a partisan process to count the votes. So even if we do vote, they can mess up how they count our votes. Last time, even Republicans stayed legal. That helped us. But next time, they're ready for a real gangster move. Another issue is how electoral districts are drawn, making it impossible to be fair, slant them in one direction. This is called gerrymandering. Take North Carolina, for example. Republicans and Democrats split the vote, 49.4 to 50%, almost equal. But Republicans got 8 seats and Democrats got 5 seats. The Republicans drew the maps. But both capitalist parties play the same game. So if you were talking Illinois, the Democrats would swing it one way, and that's the way it goes all around the country. But on a larger scale, here are two additional electoral issues, structural issues. The Electoral College, we all know, is used in place of a popular vote to determine who is going to be the president. The origin of this has something to do with slavery. Now, for the first 36 years, the presidency in the United States was held by a slave-owning Virginia, 32 years out of the first 36. The creation of the Electoral College was part of a political workaround for the persistence of slavery in the United States that included counting slaves as 3/5 for taxation and political representation. The non-slave states got the taxation piece. The slave states got the political representation piece. Now, the second issue, that's the Electoral College that has to be abolished. The second issue is the Senate has 2 representatives per state, but the population of California is over 39 million people, and Texas is almost 30 million people. This compares to Wyoming with less than 600,000 people, and Vermont with a little over 600,000 people. California has 11% of the US population. Wyoming has 1/5 of 1% of the US population, yet in the Senate, they have equal power. Both systems are not consistent with the current reality of this country. And for democracy to equally represent the population, changes have to be made. Next point, money. In a 2010 case called Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, the US Supreme Court ruled that independent political expenditures are protected under the First Amendment to the Constitution. This First Amendment was supposed to protect free speech for people. This ruling holds that corporations are like people and should be able to put as much money as they want into politics. So now money dominates the electoral process. Of course, the rich have always really dominated, but now money in a cold financial sense. Political spending in 2020 election totaled $14.4 billion, more than doubling the total cost of the record-breaking 2016. So it doubled. Victoria's Senate candidates spent an average of $15.7 million, while the average winning House candidates shelled out more than $2 million on average. We don't have to argue much to help people understand that the rich run the politics in this country. What we do have to do is convince people that they can do better, but they have to do it for themselves and not count on other people. Now, we don't have the money, but we do have each other. And when we band together, we can do great things. Again, working class power requires unity, and that means unity of action toward common goals. Now, we have to be educated to fight a winning struggle. Ignorance never wins. No excuses. We study our religion for salvation. We also need to study for liberation. Check this graph. The issue is literacy, what information you go get, what you can understand, and what kind of information can you create in your own interest. It used to be just being able to read and write was a real step forward. Then high school was adequate, but times are changing. What time is it for the level of educational attainment needed to compete and advance in this society? There's no democracy in a society when the masses of people don't have the requisite level of education to be full participants. It's like on most jobs, there's a skill level needed to do the job. But if you look at the right in this slide, you see that capitalism keeps college away from most of us. Look at these occupational categories. The blue is high school. The red is college. So the SWA has to be a context for workers to educate themselves. Labor law, civil rights law, voting rights law, the history of the class struggle. Hey, the US Constitution, what's good in it and what's wrong with it. No excuses will get us where we need to go. So first, leading in study should be organizers and those who are becoming cadre. It takes discipline, carving out 1 or 2 hours every week for reading and note-taking. And then that has to be brought into discussions, whether in one-on-one situations or in group meetings. Each one of us can become teachers if we study and are ready to share our knowledge with others. So let's turn to what we need to do, how we can make our struggle part of winning our class war, because it's really us versus them, the working class in confrontation and struggle with the capitalists and their system. But again, our process requires unity. Our unity must operate on 3 levels: tactics, the specific actions we carry out; strategy, the basic plan we have; vision, our thinking about what's wrong and what our goals are, our desired future. All of this means a coordination of our thinking and our doing, our manifestation of theory and practice. Many times people assume they have limited roles and look for others for the rest of what has to be done, especially thinking other people who are supposed to be the leaders. That's bad thinking. In fact, that's the way the capitalists want us to think. We have to teach and stand by the profound point that we are our own leaders. Each one lead one. Each one follow and lead as the situation demands. In sum, what this means is that we need a workers' program, a representation of SWA as a political force that embodies the goals and aspirations of the working class in the South, with ideas and concrete plans of action to guide and unite us in our struggle on to victory. Okay, let's walk through this. Now, tactics. This is what we're currently doing: reaching out to our fellow workers, opening a door for them to move from defense to offense in the class struggle. Leafleting and political education are about information that connects with the lived experience of the workers, pulling them into an SWA process that will allow their voices to be heard in speak outs and their courage to manifest in diverse forms of confrontation. You have a lot to say about how this is working out. You're doing this. Remember, there are no defeats, only lessons to be learned from success and failure. Our slogan is fight, fail, fight again, fail again, and then fight on to victory. Strategy. Strategy is our plan, what our tactics are working towards, implementing. Individuals being developed as staff for the struggle, people who are prepared to take responsibility. You're a manifestation of this strategic goal. You're among our first cadre. Our target is to organize the unorganized, to organize workers at their workplaces, where they work with their co-workers. This is the most important location to develop a working class power base. Our intention is to link workplace organizations into local worker assemblies. This is critical for building a social movement fighting for workers' power. This is a context for workers to develop leadership skills, networking relationships across industries, and a social force capable of waging big battles. We look forward to regional unity by calling a regional Congress that will be composed of workers' assemblies in every Southern state. Okay, so strategy and tactics are what we have been sharing with you and what you have been taking out in your organizing activities. Now we need to begin the stage of clarifying our vision of where we are heading, what future we want to build for ourselves, our class, really for all of humanity. Vision is what we need. This is not about any ism, but of course, any ism worth having should reflect and be connected to this vision. Even any form of religion or ideology can be evaluated by the tenets of this vision. The important connection here is the phrase "for all." The capitalists have distorted the word justice to mean just us. When we get arrested for minor infractions, we do real time in cold cells, while the capitalists usually get off or do time in luxury accommodations. We wonder, will Trump ever do time for his crimes involving millions of dollars and even a violent insurrection to take over the country? If he goes to jail, it's likely to be in a country club. At first glance, our strategy links directly to economic justice. Of course, our vision points us to consider what would be a post-capitalist economy. What would a post-capitalist economy be like? We might even consider thinking about the Economic Bill of Rights put forward by Franklin Roosevelt. Everyone gets a job. Everyone has a place to live with a livable income and many other rights. This is a vision we need to rekindle. Expanding democracy has always been the journey this country has been on. The fight to include women in the franchise, to include Black people, to include younger people, to open pathways to citizenship for new arrivals. But now they're reversing things, trying to take all that away, and this has to change. All workers need to have the right to vote, but more, SWA has to make this a vision of how we roll. All our fellow workers are part of society and must be part of our democracy. Our vision is not just about the workplace, although this is where our power is based. We're for social justice for everyone. We see it's including passing and ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment and anything else that will remove male supremacy and gender discrimination. We see this as requiring the end of racism, whether by police violence, housing patterns, healthcare, discriminatory practices, wherever and whenever. Racism, as we said earlier, is bad for the mental health of everyone in this country. It's got to stop. Environmental justice is way past having each household recycle, although that is a moral necessity for all of us. This is a direct confrontation with capital. Climate change is tied to the commodification of nature, from fossil fuels to nuclear. The major corporations make profit from creating climate change crises, and we have to see it as a world beyond all this. This is a great confrontation with capital. Their profits are directly connected to the environmental crisis that endangers our lives. And of course, there's a fight for peace in a world where war is a normal part of the capitalist playbook. Now here on this slide in the upper right-hand corner, we use the ancient symbol of the Ankh. It stands for life, sustainable life. Now the recent struggle at Virginia Beach by the city workers is a good case to look at. They used the tactics of leaflets, outreaching to all city workers, holding discussions to get a set of demands. They developed a network of supporters, ministers, and civic leaders. They demonstrated and they confronted the city council by speaking out. The strategy of SWA was at play here. We await the way this militant action will contribute to building a local workers' assembly. Now, what is the role of cadre in bringing a vision forward? There are at least three ways that this struggle can be raised up to the level of vision, three fundamental aspects of an SWA vision. One, unionization and collective bargaining for economic justice, for city workers, for all workers. That builds the workers' assembly. Workers' power to take control of the city council for democracy. The politics of workers' power, and challenging city council policies for social and environmental justice. What bills are passed by the city council? This discussion will not take place automatically, but it is essential for us to think about our path forward and ways to determine how to move, when to move, and who we can begin to work with now for future actions. We know the future we want and will get. The future is working class power. And with that, we will use strategy and tactics to achieve our goals, to realize our vision. Democracy for all, economic justice for all, social justice for all, environmental justice for all, world peace for all. As mentioned, we are sliding into an anocracy. From democracy, such as it was, to authoritarianism. The dreaded image of the past we face is fascism. It's time to do some serious thinking about what time is it? What is the nature of the times we are living in?